two of our coverage lines. There is a third coverage line that I would be happy to increase the limits on, but that's the maximum available in the market right now. And part of the requirement to have that additional liability limit requires us to increase the board's self-insured retention from $100,000 on all of the liability coverages except auto liability, which is $125,000. So it's not exactly double on everything, but it is double. And so to take that additional risk in the lower level of our liability, you would expect to receive a savings, of course. And so the little chart that I really have in the middle explains why I believe it's in the board's best interest to save the just under $126,000 that we will receive by taking this option. And I went back all the way to 2009 to analyze the losses and adjust them for inflation. And just based on our actual loss history, I estimate this would have cost on average about $41,500 more per year. So we basically, in any one year it can exceed that average, but on average I would expect for the board to net in, present dollar values about $84,000 a year. The other part of my analysis and why I'm recommending this to you is, of course, the board can afford to self-insure the lower level of our risk, and what we're really trying to protect are the most catastrophic losses. And that's why I'm really interested in trying to increase the liability limits on the coverages where we can. And by doing this, instead of having staggered liability limits, it'll be pretty clean all the way across, with the exception of the sexual abuse liability, which will remain where it is currently just because there's not additional coverage available. Perhaps we could throw money at the problem to try to buy a little more coverage, but I'm talking about cost-effective risk management. And so I know that some of you may have looked at this in the future, but is there any pause on my description of page 3 before I move on? Okay. Page 4, I always like to mention that for the board's liability coverages, the named insured is Bossier Parish School Board. This isn't an insurance policy for separate entities that do help us. It could be booster clubs or other clubs or LLCs that are started to support schools. Of course, this board, number one, doesn't have a common insurable interest because it doesn't own those entities. And secondly, in my opinion, it wouldn't be in the board's best interest to buy the liability coverage for those entities because each should stand on its own. So sometimes I just like to clear that up right up front, that we're buying liability coverage for liabilities of Bossier Parish School Board. On page 5, you can see that for the first time in a while, it's not true apples to apples comparison. I guess we would be slightly up if we considered that average annual loss increase of $41,500, but our premium would be down about $17,800. And I know that's not a big, huge savings, but the great news is we don't have a big increase. And so my hope is that we're finding that happy medium of where we're managing the risk well within the self-insured retention. Our legal counsel assist us with claims, and we've had good results from our third-party administrator. On page 5, under note number 3, I'm not recommending you buy the certified acts of terrorism coverage because we have that elsewhere. Okay? If we go to page 6, the general liability, this is one of those coverages that was already at the higher limit. The only change on this particular coverage would be the self-insured retention change from $100,000 to $200,000. If we go to page 7, for the errors and omissions liability, you will see that this is one of those that would be increased both on a per claim basis and then the annual aggregate. And remember, just just to describe that aggregate, meaning a collective basket of dollars. However it's split up, that collective basket of dollars is available subject to the each claim limitations. And you can see that the sexual abuse is included in that particular line item. And of course, I think it's very prudent for us to take advantage of higher limits when it makes sense. And you can see about at the middle of the page, the change noted as well about the $200,000 self-insured retention. If we go to page 8, the auto liability, this is another one of those limits that I'm most interested in increasing. And as we know, we have a lot of vehicles on the road. They work very hard to operate safely. And I forget what the total miles that Colonel Haddon can just say from memory that we travel every year. But this is one of my concerns, and I would be very happy to have a little more coverage here. And you can see on this self-insured retention in the middle of the page it's increasing from $125,000 to $200,000. And I guess I'll pause here for a moment because the board, you could direct me to keep the coverage like it is and the insurer is willing to do it. It'll just cost us a little more than $125,000 more in premium to do it. So basically they are funding more than one additional full self-insured retention claim by giving us that $125,000 discount. Okay, try to incentivize you to have more skin in the game. In the middle of page 8, it'll be a separate agenda item, and it's going to be on the following page, and I also just gave you this loose page. Just as a reminder, the board has historically rejected uninsured motorist bodily injury and property damage coverage, primarily because we're trying to devote our premium dollars to the coverages that protect you for your liability, not necessarily for other people's liability, okay? And the reason why we actually read that motion into the record as a true resolution is so that no one can challenge whether or not your chief financial officer is authorized to make that decision, because that has been a key point of consideration when people try to challenge this decision. So we'll revisit that. I'll just skip over page 9, and then I will go to page 10. And I just try to communicate to you some of the more applicable exclusions, limitations on policies, and there are things that you can buy separate coverage for, such as pollution liability. There are other things that you can't buy insurance for, and that's, of course, intentional misrepresentation of fact, which we don't do, but I always like to mention that. And so, Mr. President, that really concludes my presentation for agenda item 3.01, and it would be my recommendation that the board accept this offer with the increased liability limits and self-insured retentions for a period of 1 year. But I'd be glad to entertain any questions.
Any questions or comments?
So moved, Mr. President.
I have a motion by Mr. Newman.
Second.
Second by Mr. Bullard. Please vote. Motion passes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Do we also, do we need to read?
We'll do
All
the
right,
next agenda
3.02.
item.
Motion to reject.
Request consideration of a resolution authorizing Bossier Parish School Board Chief Financial Officer, Ms. Nisha Bamberg, to reject uninsured, underinsured motorist bodily injury and property damage insurance, again presented by Mr. Doug Rogers.
Thank you again, Mr. President. And just to recover where I left off, of course, this item is both page 9 in your book, and then I have this single sheet here. And it's my recommendation that the board resolved to authorize Ms. Bamberg to reject this coverage. And if the board is in agreement, someone will need to make a motion reading this into the record and approve this specific language for the resolution.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to reject the uninsured, underinsured motorist bodily injury and property damage coverage from the automobile policy and further move to authorize Nisha Bamberg, Chief Financial Officer, to sign on behalf of Bossier Parish School Board to reject uninsured, underinsured motorist bodily injury and property damage coverage from the automobile insurance policy for the policy period of September 20th, 2024 to September 20th, 2025.
We have a motion by Mr. Newman, second by Ms. Smith. Please vote. Motion passes. Item 3.03, request. Renewal for a period of 1 year, the auto physical damage insurance purchased for driver education autos as required by the board's lease with Red River Motor Company, LLC. Presented by Mr. Doug Rogers.
Thank you again, Mr. President, and thank you for approving that, Mr. Newman. I'm very sorry for the length of that last motion, but I am grateful. So at the end of where we left off, there is a black divider, black plastic page that if you push past, you will see page 11. And that's where I'm picking up. At the top, it says Automobile Physical Damage Premium Summary. And this premium this year is almost identical, but again, as I always tell the board, this is just based on the number of driver's education units at the time the insurance is renewed. Units are added, units are deleted, and so this is always a moving target, of course, and it's just like your insurance is. We pay based on the number of days of coverage. So if we add one and we keep it for 6 months, we're going to pay 6 months worth of premium. Again, as was stated earlier, this is a condition of the lease that the board has with Red River Motor Company for them to allow us to use those autos for driver education. And we're very fortunate that we do have that available to us. But this is the coverage that protects those cars when they are involved in fender benders. One point that I always like to remind the board of, which is on page 12 in the middle, is for as long as I'm aware of, which is several decades, the board has self-insured the physical damage to its owned autos. And of course, every year we talk about how that has paid dividends in really untold premium savings over the years. The board is exposed, of course, when we self-insure and during the summer when these buses are grouped together at, the Resource Center, Airline High School, other locations. Is it possible we could have a catastrophic loss that impacts us significantly? Yes, it is. And it's something that we just have to be aware of. And that is only one of the reasons why I've recommended, along with Ms. Bamberg's agreement, that we continue to build a loss fund for events just like that. If the board wanted to buy physical damage coverage for its auto fleet, it could. If the board ever wanted to do that, however, I would just encourage us to only focus on the newer models because it's a depreciated value policy. Obviously, some of our buses would not have a high worth, and that's one of the things that helps us be able to consider those groupings. Not every single bus is going to be a brand new bus, and that's part of it. But it's my job to remind you of that every year. My recommendation to the board would be to accept this offer for the physical damage for these driver's education vehicles for a period of 1 year, but I would be glad to entertain any questions.
So moved, Mr. President.
Motion by Mr. Newman. Second by Mr. Williams. Please vote. We have a question by Mr. Bullard. Well, everybody voted? Newman, Ms. Poole? Motion passes. Comment, Mr. Bullard? Question?
Yes, sir.
question to Mr. Rowland. I was told the other day in a conversation that Bossier Parish possibly was only one of two school systems that still provides driver's education opportunities, classes. Is there any validity to that?
We're one of 10.
One of 10,
One of
okay.
10 parishes in the state that offer driver's
Okay, I'm sorry, I must have misunderstood, but I'm glad we do. Any parent that has to seek out a private commercial enterprise, the savings we represent are significant, and that's got to help a lot of parents out.
We have totally restructured our driver's education program, and it is going to function as a well-oiled machine going forward.
Well, I'm not going to say it makes us unique, but I hope the parents of these students realize what an opportunity, a financial savings we're providing to them. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. President.
I did not want to step away from the podium without saying thank you.
Thank you. Item 3.04, request approval of program for professional evaluation presented by Ms. Terry Howe, Director of Human Resources.
Good evening, Superintendent Rowland, President Bertrand, members of the board. The program for professional evaluation will be uploaded to the parish website. This is something that we visited in July, when we, actually I think it was the 30th of June, when we adopted the new law that required the statement for overtime. That has been added to all job descriptions in the PPPE, and those were the only changes that had not already been brought to the board. So at this time, I would ask that you approve this for the following year.
On a motion by Mr. Bullard, second by Ms. Darby. Please vote. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Item 3.05, permission to issue solicitations, maintenance vehicles, presented by Ms. Carrie Douglas, Chief Procurement Officer.
Good evening, President Bertrand, Superintendent Rowland, members of the board. The maintenance department is looking to update some trucks within their vehicle fleet, and to accomplish this, with your permission, we'd like to issue a solicitation to seek bids. All bids that we receive in response to this solicitation will be brought back before you for formal award at a later meeting.
Questions? Mr. Newman?
Thank you, Mr. President. Do we have a number of the total maintenance vehicles, and of that number of maintenance vehicles, how many of those are taken home every night versus left at a centralized location or another facility?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Roget on the use of his vehicles.
So we do have maintenance vehicles that go home with employees?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
They're on emergency call-out.
Okay, and those are pretty much the only ones that go home? Okay, thank you. I just wanted that clarification that you just said right there.
Any other questions, comments? This time we'll entertain a motion. Motion by Ms. Brotherton, second by Ms. Smith. Please vote. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Item 3.07, item 1 of the Administrative Committee, approval of revisions of policies ABCB qualifications for school board members, BBBC school board members continuing education, BCBB notification of school board meetings, GBA contract and compensation, GBRIB sick leave, GBRIBB sick leave bank, JDA corporal punishment, JGC student health services, JGCB immunizations, JGCD administration of medication, and JGCFA behavioral health services for students as recommended by Fourth Art Counseling and Counsel. this time,
Mr. President.
Ms. Poole.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. We had the administrative committee today, September 5th, 5 o'clock p.m., with all committee members present. And Ms. Spinney did an excellent job of going over each of the revisions to these policy items that you just listed. And I won't go through listing all of them, but we unanimously, out of committee, approved the revisions based on presentation today.
This item was out of committee. Please vote. Motion passes. Item 3.08, report Finance Committee meeting held September 5th, 2024 at 5:30 p.m., presented by Mr. Glenn Bullard. At this time, we do have a comment request from Mr. David Crockett.
You all, Mr. President, Superintendent Rowland, and all of you esteemed people who serve on this board, thank you for what you do. I just had some questions. I've reviewed some of the past finance meetings, and there were some issues that were raised that I just wanted to present to the body. And then from the meeting prior to this, where Ms. Bamberg talked about one of the assumptions, I think, was a 90% millage. I wasn't quite sure with that, which is kind of addressing one of the issues that I came here for, because I thought that in the public advertisements or public news sources, I thought that we were going to discuss millage at this meeting, and I don't know when that's going to occur, so I'd like to know a little bit more about that. I have two issues with that. One is that, of course, in the meetings that I've listened to, I haven't heard anybody discussing the fact that we're in a highly inflationary period and that any millage or tax roll forward will have an impact on the community. Not only is it a tax on the people who are the property owners, everybody's rent prices will go up and be reflected in those any millage that goes forward. And I think the other thing is sometimes even a higher tax at the point of sale for every consumer in Bossier Parish. So I think that's something that's considered, but I haven't heard it discussed at any of the Finance Committee meetings. I hope that is going to be discussed. But what I couldn't tell from the previous meeting was whether a decision has already been made on the tax millage. I know that Ms. Bamberg recommended that that those taxes be rolled forward. I wanted to raise another thing that I saw in some of those meetings. I may be just missing some, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Rowland, on any of that, but I do, another issue that I have is that in a couple of the meetings ago, there was a discussion about whether the school board was going to be using money to put new AstroTurf out at Benton. Nobody can answer in the meeting whether that the stadium itself is going to be the 5 or 10 year stadium for Benton High School, and so I think that was something that was not addressed in there, and I think that needs to be addressed to the public, because I don't think anybody wants to spend $1 million or $1.5 million or whatever it costs for AstroTurf if you're not going to use that. I thought whoever asked that question, it was a very good question, and I think the other issue with that is there's no conclusive evidence whether AstroTurf is safer or not. Some people think it causes more injury. And then my third issue is that I've heard in public forums and stuff, and I've been reading about the fact that Bossier is increasing the size of its health clinics, and I haven't heard it explained anywhere in public whether this is primarily or all through grants and what are the long-term costs for that. So I guess in essence, if you sum all this up, what I'd like to see is I couldn't find anything on Bossier's website, anything that has a strategic vision that covers those things. I don't have my 3 minutes, I can't tell by looking at anything. But those are my issues. I'd like to see more on strategic vision that would be placed on the Bossier Parish School Board website, so I can see all those things, and I'd like to know more about whether the millage has been assumed or
Thank you,
not.
Mr. Crockett.
Thank you.
September 19th, we'll be discussing that. September 19th.
Mr. Crockett. Again, Mr. Glenn Bullard, Chairperson, Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Finance Committee of the Bossier Parish School Board did meet this afternoon. All members were present, and of course, the Finance Committee is a meeting of the whole. We had a few items. One was discussion only public hearing for our 24-25 budget. There were no public comments. Our chief accountant, Ms. Brenda LaChin, presented the budget, and it was accepted by the committee without comment. Item number 2, the committee recommends the Bossier Parish School Board adopt the budget resolution for the original budget for the 2024-2025 fiscal year. This is based upon the presentation presented by Ms. LaChin. It was approved unanimously.
These items come out of committee. Please vote. Motion passes.
Next, the committee recommends the Bossier Parish School Board approve differentiated compensation supplement schedule and guidelines as presented. This followed the state mandates, and again, it was approved unanimously.
This item out of committee. Please vote. Motion passes.
Mr. President, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Bullard. Agenda item 3.12, employee request for leave without pay, presented by Mr. Jason Rowland, Superintendent.
Thank you, President Bertrand. Board members, per board policy, anytime we have a request for leave without pay, of course, that does come to the board for a vote for your approval. We have a request from Ms. Pamela Dennis from August 6th through March 6th of 2025, leave without pay. Supervisor is Ms. Carla Horton. What's the pleasure of the board?
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Smith,
Second.
second by Ms. Darby. Please vote. Motion passes. Item 3.13, request approval of trip requests.
Thank you, Mr. President. These are in order.
Thank you.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Brotherton, second by Mr. McConaughey. Please vote. Motion passes. 4.01, announcements, superintendent's comments.
Thank you, President Bertrand. And first of all, I want to compliment our board, how nice you look tonight in your shirts. You look sharp, sharp, sharp. I wonder who came up with those, right? Mrs. Carrier. No, Ms. Carrier did. So thank you, thank you, thank you. First of all, our next meeting is going to be September 19th. It's going to be a big night for us. Finance Committee meeting is going to be at 5:30. September 19th, the regular session of the board, of course, will be at 6. And during that meeting, we'll have an agenda item that will excuse us into executive session to discuss some issues with the board that are relative to the purpose of why we would move into executive session. So we'll look forward to that and bring you up to speed on some items that we've been working on and some things that we want the board to be informed on in that session. So, Mr. Bertrand, that is all I have for tonight.
We have a comment, Mr. Bullard.
I just want to caution, we will be reviewing the agenda for the Finance Committee meeting, and we may have to move that back to 5:15 or possibly 5 o'clock. So if everyone would please sort of, pencil in 5 to 6, hopefully we can keep it at 5:30. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Agenda 1.01, adjournment of the regular session of the board.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Smith,
Second.
second by Mr. Faulty. Please vote. Motion passes, meeting adjourned.